more than a minute. Introduction to the book of Judges. I didn't do this with the book of Joshua, but I really want to with the book of Judges, and I'll probably at least try to do this with all the books that we have going forward. That is to give an overview of what this book is and all of these sorts of details. Well, first things first, we don't know exactly who wrote the book of Judges. Perhaps most convincing to me is the thought that Samuel, the prophet of a couple books from now, that he is the one who wrote the book of Judges. This seems to make sense to me. As we'll see throughout the book of Judges, it really feels like the author is driving a point home. And that is that the Judges and the time period in which they exist is a problematic time. It's hard for the people of Israel. And in many ways, it sets the stage for why the people want a king. Judges then can almost be seen as the direct setting and background of the book of Samuel, yes, but also why there are kings in Israel. And we hear this a lot of times in this common refrain in the book of Judges, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This is often a reference to idolatry, but in it as well as this issue of there's no king to set standard rules of behavior. Yes, they have the Mosaic covenant, but that doesn't cover everything. And so Judges in many ways, at least in my view, sets the stage for the kings. And so that's why I think that Samuel wrote the book, although no author is listed, so we don't know who wrote the book for sure. So when did this take place? And I think rather than giving dates, because all the dates are contested and there's lots of good reasons for that, I think the best way to understand the time period of Judges is to understand it as a length of time and where it falls in the biblical narrative. So first of all, it comes immediately on the heels of the conquest with Joshua, and it comes as immediately preceding the kings. So again, the book of Judges is kind of this link in the chain, bringing us from Moses and Joshua and the conquest to the kings and everything that happens after that. One of the things that's easy to miss is, and again, this is all debated among scholars, but in all likelihood, from the beginning of this book to the end of this book is almost 300 years. One of the things that the Bible can often do, at least to modern readers, is kind of telescope the time scale. So as you read through the book of Judges, if you don't pay too much attention to the dates and the years, you might get the sense that the book of Judges takes place over a very short period of time. That's not true. That being said, dating Judges and figuring out how long the book of Judges, the time frame, is a difficult venture. Some of the Judges overlap with one another. There are gaps in between the Judges, and so I think trying to nail down exact beginning and ending dates and exact time frames is not terribly helpful, other than to recognize that the book of Judges takes place over multiple centuries. It's a long period of time. It's a long time for God to be fairly silent and for there to be no real ruler. Again, kind of connecting us into the kings. Now, the structure of the book of Judges is probably the most important part. And I'll tell you what, this might sound irreverent, but you will never forget the book of Judges after hearing it. The way I want you to think about the narrative of the book of Judges is that Judges is the toilet bowl of the Bible. And this is what I mean by this. The book of Judges is a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again. This cycle begins with apostasy. That is just a fancy way of saying it begins with the people not worshiping God the way they are supposed to. From apostasy, we move into oppression. God sends conquerors and oppressors to the Israelites to remind them of their sin. God thumps them, is one way of thinking about it. So from apostasy, we move to oppression. From oppression, we move to repentance and a cry for help. The Israelites recognize that God is their only helper. They perhaps remember the covenant they made with Joshua, or their forefathers made with Joshua, and they call on the Lord. They ask the Lord for help, and then the Lord sends judges. Deliverance is our final step here. Judge A judge in the Bible is understood better not as a legal term or profession, but rather as a deliverer or a champion. There's going to be another more than a minute that kind of delves into what exactly a judge is. But here we have the conclusion of our cycle, and that is peace. So apostasy, oppression, repentance, and a cry for deliverance, the deliverance, and then peace. This is a cycle that repeats itself, and here's where the toilet bowl analogy comes back in. Because each time this cycle repeats, it gets worse and worse. The time of peace is shorter and shorter. The apostasy is longer and worse. It takes longer for the people to cry out for help. The deliverance is shortened. In some cases, when we get near to the end of the book, the deliverance is incomplete. Only portions of the people of Israel are delivered, or they're not even delivered at all, as we'll see by the end of it. And so we see as this cycle is not only repeating itself, but it's kind of going down the drain. Things are going from bad to worse. And so as a general rule, as we look through the Judges, the further you are in the book, the worse the judge is, the more problematic the judge is. And so again, that the cycle of the Judges is apostasy, oppression, the prayer for deliverance, and then peace. What's worth noting is that this cycle in the book of Judges is a microcosm. It's a small picture of the entire salvation narrative. You can imprint this cycle over the entire narrative of the Bible. It's a good way to understand what is happening in the Bible. We see apostasy in the garden. Adam and Eve breaking faith with God, trusting in themselves and the lies of Satan over the laws and commands and promises of God. From there, we have oppression. In this case, the oppression to sin, death, and the devil. The people of God, Adam and Eve in this case, are put into the hands of oppressors, suffering under the curse of Adam and Eve. From here, we see the people of God. Even in the garden, we see it crying out to God for deliverance. Adam and Eve don't quite figure out how to do it, but the people of God throughout the ages call out to God, deliver us, save us. Then the deliverance. In this case, in the grand narrative scheme, the deliverer is, of course, Christ. Christ is the judge who comes in to deliver the people of the world, his people, the faithful people of all times and in all places, from the oppression to sin, death, and the devil. From here we have peace, and this is, among others, the major difference with Judges, is that when we overlay this cycle onto the grand scheme of the Bible, it's not a cycle, it's a narrative line. Because the peace that Christ brings, the peace that Christ will bring at his final coming, is an eternal peace. There will not be a following apostasy. And so then the book of Judges does a lot of things. It prepares us for the kings. It shows us God's delivering salvation, reminding us once again that help only comes from the Lord. But it also gives us a picture of Christ, a picture of ourselves and how God delivers even us, even today. I hope you'll join us, and I hope you enjoy the book of Judges is one of my favorite books of the Bible. So I'm really excited for the rest of the Bible in a minute. It's a wonderful, exciting book. If you're not reading along, this is a good one to read along. There's so many details that I won't be able to get into in the Bible in a minute. So I hope you'll join us and enjoy the book of Judges.